Welcome to Agreeable Disagreements, a podcast where two friends with differing political ideologies choose a topic from the week and talk about it. This week, it might be a surprise because we just had the first presidential debate, and we're still kind of processing that for ourselves. Sorry, I've got my delivery driver is finishing up.
You're good. I think we can view this episode as sort of a celebration of the debate.
Of
the debate. Yeah, because
I don't know that that's something I want to celebrate.
Well, the debate was ridiculous, and we're going to be ridiculous.
That's fair.
I mean, this is our 10th episode of the season, and so every 5 episodes, sometimes we break that rule, but every 5 episodes we try and do a non-political episode. For our own sanity. And so I think the way I'm viewing it is we're not going to talk about the debate, but we are going to have our own equally ridiculous, but probably more productive debate.
Yeah. I mean, half of our last episode was about borscht, so
was it
I don't
half?
necessarily. It was a good amount.
Yeah.
It was a solid 15 minutes.
Wow.
Maybe not. I don't know.
I don't know. I thought it was like 15 minutes about food, and then doesn't matter. So we're gonna debate our own hot takes today.
Yeah. We've done this before, and it was I enjoyed it. I think our fans enjoyed it. I think we had
it's one of our higher performing episodes right now. Still.
Yeah. So do you want to go first?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to come out swinging and say that ribeye steaks are the worst cut of beef.
No. Well, first of all, no. Second of all, it depends. If you're talking about steak, then no, a chuck steak is worse.
No, and I'll tell you why. There is nothing.
Go for it.
There is nothing you can do to save a ribeye from that big hunk of grizzle in the middle that doesn't really do anything but make your steak really hard to keep together. You can do anything. Yes, you can do anything.
That's
to
all
treat
fat.
Any other
That's all
steak.
flavor.
You would think, but it's not, because there's so many other cuts of meat that either have better fat marbling or better. Because here's the thing, my big
it's
problem.
It's a different kind of fat.
Right? No, not necessarily. Like a New York strip, you're still going to have marbling in the meat. It's going to be interwoven with all the muscle fibers. Whereas ribeye, it's just like a big honk, an eye right in the middle that is not doing anything for anything around it.
No, that's completely wrong. A prime rib? You're saying a prime rib?
Prime ribs are different. They're from a different part of the cow.
No, the eye is part of the prime rib.
Yes, but the prime rib comes from further up on the cow where there's less of a fat globule right in the middle of it.
I think you're totally wrong because that fat provides flavor. I like that like really soft like piece of fat, not the real chewy piece of fat that you get on like the side of the New York strip, but I really like that like soft like fatty bit, and it tastes good.
I don't think it does. I mean, look, I spent a solid 3 years practicing cooking steaks in every which possible way to try and figure out what the best way and what the best cuts are, to the point where I've got a way now that like, I will only cook certain cuts in certain ways, and I will never.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you should do for every cut.
Well, yeah, but I mean...
Trust me, you don't want to eat a chuck steak.
Yeah, okay. Do you know who Foods is on YouTube?
No.
Okay, so he's this guy. He's, I want to say, Brazilian, living in Florida. And his whole
Brazilians know their steak.
But his whole thing is doing weird stuff to steaks. And sometimes it's dry aging them in butter. Sometimes it's dry aging for different amounts of time. Sometimes it's trying different cuts with different treatment methods to see if they'll tenderize and make better flavors. I would rather take a whole pineapple, blend it up, and marinate a chuck steak in that.
Okay, sure. Yeah, because the
minutes,
pineapple enzyme.
Yeah, they'll tenderize it and they'll add a little, just the right amount of flavor to it. Then I would have a ribeye steak any day.
Without having tried that myself, I've used pineapple enzyme like extract on, I don't remember what it was, but I've used it before, but I've never tried like marinating a chuck steak. Now, a chuck steak is a great cut of meat if you're doing like a really long braise or a stew or something where it cooks for more than 4 hours and that connective tissue can break down and it becomes tender. It's got a lot more flavor. My biggest counterpoint, though, to the ribeye being the worst cut is I think filet mignon is the worst cut.
I don't think it's the worst, but I do think it's overrated.
It's the only thing it has going for it is that it's tender, and if you know how to cook a steak, you can get other steaks that are maybe not as tender but close enough, but it has just absolutely no flavor.
Yeah. Well, it's got a very strong beefy flavor if you cook it right.
Yeah, but it's not nearly as flavorful as something like a New York strip or a flat iron.
Yeah, which I also think are overrated. Flat irons, they're good, but they're nothing to write home about.
Yeah, I mean, steak is steak. Steak is good. If you don't prepare it just absolutely wrong, I think it's pretty easy to do, which actually kind of segues into my first hot take.
Well, hold on. Before we do that, I want to ask, what is your favorite cut of steak and how would you cook it?
Gosh, I would say my favorite cut, I'm going to go porterhouse or a New York strip, which I believe a New York strip is part of the porterhouse. I think when you get like a T-bone, it's got the filet mignon on there. It's got a New York strip, and then it's got one of the other ones. I don't remember.
Yeah. So porterhouse has a New York strip and a ribeye, kind of.
Oh, ribeye. Okay. Yeah. Anyways, I gotta relearn my cuts of meat.
It's okay. I had to Google it just to double check.
I mean, my family owns a pretty well at one time.
No, I was wrong. It's a strip steak on one side and a tenderloin fillet on the other. I was wrong.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And then I think a porterhouse is that either a porterhouse or a T-bone. They're more or less the same thing. I think that's my favorite because that is it's a lot of meat, and I like to eat a lot of steak, which I don't do it very often. That's why, like, when I do, I gorge myself. What I've been doing recently is I've been putting them on my smoker, and I'm not going to get into the specifics. Kind of doing like a reverse sear kind of method. So I get it up to, I also have a sous vide machine. So if like it's the winter and I don't want to do the smoker, I usually do sous vide, and then
that's the one way I haven't tried. I want to get a sous vide so bad.
Yeah, it's great, and it works. It's perfect for chicken, because like you can get it right up to that like 160 degrees that you want it to. But yeah, same thing. I mean, you can even do it with vegetables. Like I've done it with carrots before, and then like you just get the carrots like just soft, but they're not mushy the way that they might be if you like just roast them, and then you just broil them like super quick to give them a little bit of color. But yeah, so I do the smoker, and then I sear it off, do a butter based, the classic searing French sear method at the end.
Okay.
On my cast iron, obviously.
Okay. So what I do is I love New York strips. Those are the best one for me. And I'll either,
it's a good choice.
If it's a thicker steak, then I will do either on a charcoal grill or a cast iron. If it's a thinner steak, I will only do it on the charcoal grill because it's easier to monitor the internal temperature. But if I do it, I'll just on a charcoal grill, then it's just salt and pepper, 2 minutes on the sear, and then bring it to temp on each side, 2 minutes on each side. And that's it. Because the smokiness kind of really does so much for it. That's really all you need. But if I'm doing it in my cast iron, then I'll sear it on each side and then in a cast iron. And then I'll turn the temperature of the burner almost down to medium low to help bring it to temperature while I baste it with butter. But I don't just baste it with a spoon. I throw like some garlic cloves in there with it so that it gets just a little bit of garlicky flavor, and then I'll brush the butter on with thyme. I'll make a brush out of thyme leaves.
Yeah.
And I brush that on, and it's so good.
I mean, as long as you're getting that hot butter on there while it's still like really hot, that's all you need, because that's what's going to develop that like really nice golden brown crust.
Oh yeah. All right.
Yeah. Well, okay, so my first one was that barbecue is not that hard, and all these people that are like super into, you got to do this method. Unless you're Aaron Franklin, it's fine. Barbecue is not...
What do you define as barbecue? Because I had one definition.
Not grilling. Low and slow. Specifically, I'm talking about brisket. People get so like... just in the weeds with, you have to wrap it, as soon as it hits this temperature, or like, you can't lift the lid to your smoker, or you have to use this type of wood and everything. And I'm not saying that all of it's bullshit. I'm just saying that people are too, like, they're tying their hands too much. And like so one big thing that a lot of people would probably disagree with me with my method on, when I do a brisket, I actually don't wrap mine. I've never needed to. It's never been dry. My crust is always great. I've never had an issue with the things that you'd have an issue with if you don't wrap it. Also, let people put whatever spices they want on it. I only do salt and pepper. But if you want to do some paprika in there, if you want to do, cayenne pepper, go for it. It's your food.
So
I think the purists are just doing it for their ego, and so that they can be gatekeepers.
I was going to say, I think there is a lot of gatekeeping going on with low and slow Southern barbecue, but I think I know why. Because so before we moved here to Indiana, we were living in the South. They have fragile egos. No.
I think that's a big part of it.
No. It has a lot to do with arguments over recipes that go back generations. And a lot of it is, well, grandma only told the recipe to this one person. And then, well, grandma also told me this recipe and it's slightly different. And then they start arguing about whose grandma's recipe is the right grandma's recipe. And eventually that turned...
I can guarantee it's neither one of them.
And then outside of that, you've got regional barbecue, where Kansas City is different from Alabama, which is different from South Carolina. And so they're just it's just so controversial. If you're doing
Texas barbecue and you're saucing it up before it goes on the barbecue, you are doing it wrong. But if you're just making brisket and for some reason you want to put sauce on it and you can do it so that it actually works out and it tastes good at the end, go for it. It's not going to be Texas barbecue, but I don't think that like these rigid rules about you have to bring it up to, exactly 185 or 195 or no more than 170 are just wrong, because the important thing is that you get it up to the right temperature for the Maillard reaction, which is what creates that brown crust. And that you let it get above like 155, where the collagen starts to break down and gelatinize, and you hold it at that temperature for 4 hours, because that's how long it takes. If you can do all that with a slightly different end temp, different process or something, you're going to get a good brisket.
I agree. I think you're going to get a good brisket as long as you do the basics. And I think you're going to get that with just about any food, right? Any food you make, as long as you've got the basics of like salt, fat, acid, heat, You're going to get
Great book,
something that tastes good. I haven't read the book. I've just seen the documentary she made on Netflix.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the book is like, it's just her cookbook.
Gotcha.
But the Netflix series is basically just her book distilled down.
Yeah, but it's absolutely fantastic. And it's, so I agree that when you get to those basics, you're going to have something that tastes fine. It tastes good even. Might even be...
It's going to taste great.
But I will say, having been down in the South with some of those people who take so much pride in their down to the second, down to the 10th of a degree method, it does make a difference. It really does.
I don't know. And that's coming. Okay, so what led me to this conclusion is working in coffee. I don't know if you can tell, but this is a coffee roastery. People get in the weeds like that with coffee the same way, and they'll be doing like a pour over brew method, and they get really into is it 1 second? Is your water 202 degrees or is it 205 degrees? And I taste things for a living.
Yeah.
I have a really developed palate. I've been doing it for long enough that your palate is just like any other skill or muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And I can tell you a lot of it's bullshit. Now there's certain things that aren't, there's really minute differences that you can make that will really mess up your brew. Same with barbecue. But I think when you get so granular the way that a lot of these competition people are doing, I'm not saying that they don't make an amazing brisket. I'm saying that
it's not necessary.
They still could make an amazing brisket without getting that granular.
And I agree with that, but I think the fine details are what's going to take a low and slow smoked barbecue from good to great.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also, I mean, baking is another thing. Scones are particularly hard to make. But baking isn't hard. You just have to know when you can you have to follow the recipe to the letter until you learn it well enough that you know how you can break the rules. So when I was scones are something that are fairly simple, but they're actually really hard. Or biscuits, like Southern biscuits. Really hard to do, very simple but hard to do. But if you know, to keep the butter cold, if you know the size of butter lump that you should have in there, you can, fudge your flour amount, fudge your sugar amount a little bit and still be fine, as long as you have those other hallmarks taken care of.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Maybe this is just me having had a lot of bad experiences with baking and a lot of good experiences with cooking, which if anyone doesn't know the difference, it's basically breads versus everything else. Not exactly. But
well, I mean, cooking is an art, baking is a science. That's kind of how the food industry refers to it. Cooking is a lot more, I guess, subjective. Baking, you either do it right or you don't do it right.
Sure.
But there are different ways to do it right.
So let's go ahead, I think, and transition. I think doing it right and this idea of small details and getting caught in the minutia is a good way to segue into my next one. Most of the classics of literature that are on everyone's must-read list suck.
Really?
Catcher in the Rye. Can't stand it.
Okay, shots fired.
That
is my all-time favorite book, and you know it.
I have started the book a couple of times and just can't. I don't get it. And it's not just Catcher in the Rye. It's Moby Dick. It's a ton
Moby
of
Dick
them.
is terrible. So, thing about Catcher in the Rye is it's a really well-written book for a person of a certain perspective, particularly an angsty teenage boy.
Okay, but
you weren't particularly angsty.
I was.
not in the way that Holden Caulfield was.
Sure, not in the way that Holden Caulfield was.
You weren't walking around New York City looking for a hooker.
True.
So
I can't argue. With
I wasn't either, but I feel like I had more of that angsty sensibility that J.D. Salinger wrote about in that book. And I think that's why it's so popular, is because it's written in a vernacular that is unpretentious, and it does a good job of representing these kind of common feelings that a lot of adolescent males have, and not being like precious about it.
See, but you say it's written in a way that's not pretentious, but anytime I hear people talk about Catcher in the Rye and all the things it means, it sounds pretentious.
So, okay, what I mean is J.D. Salinger's writing style is...
No, I know what you mean.
Is that J.D. Salinger?
I'm pretty sure it's... Yeah.
It's... Okay, yeah. For a second, I thought it was F. Scott Fitzgerald, but he wrote Of Mice and Men, which is also a great book.
No, F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote The Great Gatsby. Of Mice and Men is the same guy who did Grapes of Wrath, whose name is evading me right now. That's also
F. Scott Fitzgerald, I think.
No, it's not. No. John Steinbeck.
John Steinbeck. Okay, I knew that. I didn't know that, but I should have. No, so the people that are talking about Catcher in the Rye, they are pretentious. Holden Caulfield, the main character in Catcher in the Rye, is pretentious. The way that J.D. Salinger wrote it, though, is not pretentious. It's in a language that, like, it's using a dialect that is not, like, it's not flowery, you know? He's not using Shakespearean English. He's talking the way that a, 15-year-old boy would talk.
Okay, but still, and it's not just Catcher in the Rye, though, right? Like, it's Pride and Prejudice, it's, the Bronte sisters, like...
Yeah, I'm not
Frankenstein.
A fan of... I really liked Frankenstein. I actually just read that recently. I really liked it. Dracula as well. I mean, I'm a huge fan of, like, especially the American classics, like Of Mice and Men. I mean, I named my childhood dog Atticus after Atticus Finch.
See, and here's the thing. I don't think all of them are terrible. I love Of Mice and Men. I love To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason is because... I think it's because of what they're trying to do, right? And I can't speak to all of them, but I feel like books like Moby Dick, it's trying to be this huge, big deal that's in your face.
Yeah. It's just too dense, and it's too just, like, get to the point. That's kind of how I felt about Hemingway.
Yeah, The Old Man and the Sea is the only book by Hemingway that I can stand. And even then, it's tough.
I recently tried to read For Whom the Bell Tolls, and I just couldn't.
Yeah. And so, like, I hear all these people talking up all of these books, and I can't. So whenever I go looking for books to read, I'll be like, what are the books that everybody needs to read? And I've already read the ones that I think are actually good. So it's hard for me to continue going down that list,
Yeah. Wait, okay. So a little while ago, and I think I talked to you about this, I set a goal for myself, which I've abandoned finishing it this year.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a list of books that I want to read, like, at some point in my life, and I was trying to get through them all this year. So I'm going to go down the list, and I limited it to one book per author.
Okay.
I think
Is this for me to react to, respond to?
Yeah. We're just gonna give, like, a short discussion.
Okay. Give
me
nay. One at a time, then.
Okay. Dune.
Oh, absolutely love it.
Great book.
Fantastic.
Dracula.
Never read it. Can't bring myself to.
Okay, I really liked it. I thought it was really good. It was also very different than I thought. Frankenstein.
I've tried several times. I can never get more than halfway through it.
Okay, that's fair. I've started it. I haven't finished it.
Yeah, I don't get the hype.
The Iliad, but I'm also going to say the Odyssey because I know that you and I both have read the Odyssey.
I would say basic story, good. The actual amount of writing in it really drags it down.
Yeah, okay. I would agree with that. Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie.
Agatha Christie is great, but I haven't read it, so can't say. Great movie.
Okay,
the movie adaptation was really good.
I couldn't get through it. I to be fair, I didn't really give it a good shot. So
I really like Kenneth Branagh on my part. I really like Kenneth Branagh as Poirot. Anyway, keep going.
The Divine Comedy.
I like The Inferno. I haven't read the other two.
I think that's the only one that I've read any significant amount of.
Yeah, I like The Inferno. The other two, I haven't tried them.
Yeah. Paradise Lost.
Haven't read it.
I haven't read that one either. I'm very intrigued by it, though.
Well, I heard my English major friends talk about it and figured it was not for me.
Yeah, that may. Yeah. The Jungle. Or Cannery Row, because I was going between the two of those.
I have read parts of The Jungle, and I've had to teach sections of The Jungle when I was in grad school as a TA. Okay. I don't know that I could make it through the whole thing, but I do think there are parts of it that everybody should read.
Okay. Yeah. I think so too. I mean, I think it's a book that either The Jungle or Cannery Row, and for those of you who don't know, both of them are about like early 20th century like meat processing, and which sounds weird, but it's more about like people's lives, and also talks about the conditions. And I think the jungle or Cannery Row played a huge part in establishing the first food safety standards in America. So I think everyone who studies, that and unionizing. But I think it's something everyone who works in like food production, like on a scale like this, should read one of those two.
Gotta love Upton Sinclair. Anyway,
let's see.
Keep going.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Oh God. No.
Now, before you disparage it, remember that Ken Kesey is a native son of Springfield.
That
I am wearing a Springfield Drifters hat.
That doesn't help. I left there, man.
Yeah. I mean, you're also not a native son.
Well, okay. I mean, kind of. Mostly, yeah. But still, I just...
What do you mean, kind of mostly? You lived here for like 3 years.
In Springfield, yes. But I was in the Pacific Northwest from the time I was Washington. Like 18 months old. No, I was... So first we moved... So I was born... Those of you who didn't know, I was born out here in Indiana, down in southern Indiana, where my mom's family is from. But by the time I was 2, we were living in a small town called Milton Freewater, Oregon, which is where my dad was from.
Oh, that's right. I knew that.
And we lived there until I was like 7 or 8. And then we lived in Walla Walla, Washington, which was just right across the border from Milton Freewater.
Still Washington.
You can see them on each side of the river.
If we don't let people who live in Vancouver say that they're from Oregon, we're not going to let people from Walla Walla.
And then I did live in Vancouver, Oregon, or Vancouver, Washington. The time I was, I want to say 9 or 10 until I was 14. After my freshman year is when we moved to Springfield.
And that's when we met.
Yes. And to be fair, I was technically still officially, according to the government, living there until I moved to Alabama.
Okay, but you were in Poland
and Hawaii.
You were in Poland and Hawaii.
But my official
you weren't even
residence,
on the same continent.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. Ken Kesey, I'm sure is fine. I'm sure he's a good person.
I've never tried reading it, so honestly, I have no idea.
I haven't either, because again, I hear my English major friends talk about it, and I'm like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's enough of that list.
Can I tell you one that should be on your list?
Yes.
Catch-22, if you haven't already read it, should be on that list.
That one is not on this list, and I'm not sure why.
Because it's great... it's by Joseph Heller.
Okay, yeah, I don't have that one.
Yeah, it's a very good example of American absurdism.
Okay.
So if you're someone who gets a kick or a hoot out of something like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it's not quite your thing because it's British weird kind of humor, then you might like...
Which, if that's not your thing, you need to reevaluate your taste.
But you might like Catch-22 just because it's an American humor take on that kind of absurdist type of thing. And it also is a really good example of just how redundant and crazy life in the United States military can be. And then you should also have Slaughterhouse-5.
I do have Slaughterhouse-5.
Okay. One of my favorite books.
Yeah.
Just from a historian's perspective, I think the way he handles bouncing around between time and how his perspective on the past and the future, and I think it's just an amazing perspective to have when examining the past and its implications for the future. I think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard good things. I've never read anything by Vonnegut.
I almost. I was this close to getting a teaching job at the high school he went to.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, so he grew up in Indianapolis, and I applied for a job at what is now called Central High School, I think.
Okay.
It's been 3 years since I did that job application. Let me double check that.
See if you have a reply.
No. Anyway, Lawrence? No, I can't find it. I don't remember. This was 3 years ago. Anyway, I applied for a job at the high school that he went to, and I was told multiple times that I was their number 2, and they were waiting to hear back from the other guy, who was also waiting to hear back from a job.
Are you sure
offer.
They said their number 2 or a number 2? So that could have been something different than you thought. I am a perpetual child.
This episode of Agreeable Disagreements is brought to you by the goodness of our hearts. We make no money off of this, and do it purely for fun, and in the hopes that enough people will one day listen and get the message that it's okay to disagree. It's okay to learn more and change your mind. And it's okay to say, yeah, I can see that, when you in fact can't see that and just want to move forward in the conversation because you've already been talking for an hour and a half, even though you try to keep your podcast to an hour and 15, and you promised your wife that this time we'll stick to the time limit, I swear. Anyway, back to the podcast. While we were taking a quick little break, I Googled it, and it's Shortridge High School. So if anybody from Shortridge High School is listening to this, I would still like that job if it's open.
You're just like, if they're hiring, let me know.
Which, I mean, I like my current job, don't get me wrong. I got everything I wanted out of my contract offer for this upcoming year, so, and then some. So, I mean, it's not like I'm not happy where I'm at, but, I mean, Shortridge High School, I really liked your place when I was there for the interview. Just saying.
Fair enough. God, anyway. It is so hot in here. It's like 101 degrees outside, and you can't see it, but right to the side of me is a 15 kilogram coffee roaster that's been run all day at like 400 degrees. So it's very, very warm.
Well, let's do just one or two more and then we'll call it quits and you can go cool off.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess our hot takes really synced up because my next one is that functionally an audiobook is the same as reading a book and you don't get extra points because you actually sat down and read it And anyone who has that opinion is being ableist. No arguments? Okay, next one.
Way to use the current buzzword vernacular.
No, I mean, I am being sincere. I was using the buzzword, maybe not sarcastically, but facetiously.
Facetious,
but so, like, for somebody like me, so I have ADHD, not, super severe ADHD. But I like, mine is more the attention part of it. It's not the hyperactivity. And it's the way that I've heard. I mean, you have ADHD too, but it presents itself in different ways between us.
Sure.
But
I don't think I have as severe cases you do either.
Well, I mean, it's different for every person.
Sure.
And I actually like the description of it being not an attention deficit disorder, but an attention dysregulation disorder.
Sure.
So it's very, very hard for, like, I can read. I have, like, when I was in school, I always scored super high on, like, the reading comprehension tests. In fact, I think the reading portion of my SAT, I got a perfect score on, or like maybe missed one or two questions. It was definitely my highest category. But I don't read quickly, and when I'm reading, it's hard for me to actually, like, kind of filter through all of that. And a lot of times what'll happen is I'll read a line 4 or 5 times and I won't have, like, really read any of it.
Yeah.
And I get into this, like, barroom argument a lot about, like, I'll be like, oh yeah, I just read Dune. And one of my friends who's being a jerk is like, you didn't read Dune, you listened to Dune. And it's like, okay, but I still know what happens in the plot. I still took in that information and digested it and, wrestled with it internally. And I made the effort to do that. And you didn't even read it. So why are you giving me, guff for it?
I will say
I think the audiobook should be looked at with just as much reverence as sitting down and actually reading. I don't think that there's any prestige that goes along with you looked at it instead of listened to it.
I think if you were to talk to me about this 2 years ago, I would have disagreed with you. But I have changed my views significantly. Partially as I've come to understand a little bit more about how reading and ADHD go hand in hand, how they affect one another. I've done that, one, just as I've come across people explaining it more on social media, or as I've read studies, or as I've looked into how to work with my students who have, severe ADHD cases and how I can make my lessons more applicable to them.
Yeah. Or things like dyslexia. I mean,
right. Yeah. Which is often a comorbidity.
Yeah.
What I will say is it does vary a little bit by person. I will say that for me, I usually have 3 books going at any time. There's a book that I'm physically reading, and motivating myself to read it can be hard sometimes because it does take that. I have to get myself into the zone kind of a thing. I have to read at the same time each day, which for me is just a really easy thing to do if I sang in bed before I go to sleep.
Yeah, routine, which is also like pretty standard for people with ADHD.
Right.
I also think that so I typically have several books going at once. I listen to audiobooks and podcasts all day while I'm here. But I do try to keep one book that I'm actually reading, and it's not because, there's anything different. It's just that motivation to actually sit down and read gives me it kind of forces me to carve that time out, which is more or less just kind of like meditative, just personal quiet time. Yeah. And so having a book that I'm sitting down and reading, and knowing that if I'm reading a book, I have to be in a very specific, like, calming kind of frame of mind. Weirdly, I really like to read when I'm at a bar, because there's just enough going on around me that it's not totally silent, and I can't handle total silence. But I don't have to, like, be actively engaged with somebody. And there's never something so interesting going on that, it's going to divert my attention.
Well, I usually have a physical book I'm reading. I've got a audiobook that I'm listening to for myself, and then we have an audiobook that we are listening to in our commute. I think there are some books that I prefer to read, and there are some books that I prefer to listen to, and I think a lot of that comes down to the narrator.
Yeah. I would say that's accurate.
Because there are some books that I love where the narrator is just awful, and so I'll read that one. And then there are some books
where Will Wheaton's the narrator, and you never want to miss out on that. You don't like Will Wheaton?
I it's not that I don't like him. I guess I'm not hyped up by his.
Oh, he's my favorite narrator. And I'm saying this as somebody who very, very much despised Wesley on Star Trek. I cannot tell you how much I hate that little snot.
I will say there are some books as well that just the style of it is something that I would prefer to listen to. Like, I recently had a book called Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, recommended to me by a friend and coworker. And the way it was narrated, so the whole premise of the book is it follows these two half-sisters in Africa who don't know that each other exist. One of them gets sold into slavery. One of them basically gets turned into the upper class of the area because she gets married off to a European commander at the time. Okay. And then each chapter is is the next generation down.
Interesting. Okay.
And so it starts out with, 1700s African triangular slave trade, but it ends with, present day, where one of their descendants travels back to kind of get in touch with his roots, and unknowingly, not knowing that they're related, comes into contact with a descendant of, the woman who stayed. And she kind of shows him around. It's just really cool. And what I really liked about the narration that I think added to the book was the narrator narrated in accent and in vernacular. Meaning, when it's in Africa, he did an African accent. When it's in America, he did the requisite American accent. Where he did, if it's in the South, he did the South. If it's in the Bronx, he did the Bronx. And I think that added just that extra layer to it that made me really enjoy it.
If you were actually reading the book and you were doing that in your head, even though it's still in your head, it would be racist.
Is it? Because I have a ton of students who are straight up...
To do an affected accent of an African native, that would be pretty problematic for you to do out loud, at least.
Out loud, sure. I don't know, though. I think if it's something that I'm just making up and assuming this is what it sounded like, sure, I'd agree with you. But I've had enough students and friends who are from Central or Western Africa that I've been exposed to their accents enough that I feel like if it's in my head and I'm saying, oh, this takes place in Ghana, I have friends in Ghana.
I was making a joke about people who are like, oh, I'm going to try to do this funny accent. And it's just an accent of like somebody who immigrated here from, a different country. And it's like, that wasn't a good choice.
That I will agree with that. Sorry. I didn't pick up on the joke.
Yeah, no, it was not a good joke to begin with.
But I do agree with your premise that listening to a book and reading to a book are the same, because as I've looked more into it, as I've changed my mind about this, there's been a number of studies done that show that particularly among ADHD communities or people who have ADHD, there is higher retention when it is spoken out loud than when it is simply presented in text.
Well, and I mean, it goes to your learning style too. Certain people learn visually, certain people learn, kinetically. But also, I mean, it's like, would you say that, like, I consider myself a well-read individual, but I haven't actually read that many books. But the knowledge that I have is, comparable to the knowledge of somebody who has actually read that many books. So really, like, what is the important part? Is it that you've accumulated the knowledge, or that you've done the drudge work of, reading it visually?
Yeah. Well, and at the end of the day, I think you would have to ask, what's the difference between you listening to a book and a blind person listening to a book?
Well, yeah, exactly. And that goes back to, like, the ableist, even though I was saying it kind of jokingly, like, there is some of that in there. And, if you're going to say that it's different, then you're essentially saying that, somebody who's blind can't be, well read, which is absolutely not true.
Sure.
So anyways, I guess we're more or less in agreement on that one, it sounds like.
Yeah. I think because I've had, my phone turned off. Because I've had enough time to look into it and expose myself to it, and learn more about the current academic consensus. Yeah, I'm with you, because it's not just an opinion thing at this point. It's a scientifically proven fact that you can retain just as much listening as you can reading. So
I mean, I think the gut, like, the knee-jerk reaction for everyone is to be like, no, they're not the same. But then, like, when you think about it, you're like, I guess, there's really no difference. Sorry, I have the hiccups.
You're good. Do you want to do one more each and then call it a night?
Yeah.
All right. Here's my last one. Oof. Okay. I got a couple to choose from. I'm going to combine two into one, because they're very much related. Lin-Manuel Miranda is not that good. And on top of that, Hamilton is only okay. I would give it a B- at best.
No. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. First of all, In the Heights is fantastic, as well as Hamilton. No, you're wrong.
Here's the thing. Hamilton specifically, I sat down, because I'm teaching 8th grade this year, which is more advanced U.S. history than what I taught to my 5th graders this last year. So I was thinking, hey, maybe I can show Hamilton, because I've only ever heard the songs. And the songs all sound the same to me, with the exception of, like, when the British people sing, which I know is a stylistic reason for that. I get it. But I got halfway through it, and I was like, it's the same rhythm and the same melody over and over and over again.
No,
for like there's 2.5 hours.
There's musical themes that run through the show, and but the same could be said for Jesus Christ Superstar. And are you going to say that Angela
is overrated?
No, God, no, Cameron, no. You've insulted 2 of my top 3 favorite musicals.
I will say, Lin-Manuel Miranda writing for Disney is solid.
Yeah.
I think Encanto, Moana, hard to beat those movies. And so when I go from that level to...
Have you seen In the Heights?
I have not seen In the Heights.
In the Heights is really good.
I saw it was Lin-Manuel Miranda, and I was like, eh.
I really, really liked it.
Isn't it another retelling of West Side Story? Or something like that?
I can see where that theme would come from, but not really. It's much. I think it's much different, because it's not so much. It's about Washington Heights on like just above Harlem, on the west side of Manhattan, which is where Lin-Manuel Miranda grew up. So it's about that neighborhood, the people that live in there, and then they have this like heat wave that causes a blackout, and there's this kind of will they won't they love story. There's it's not really, I wouldn't say that it's, I mean, West Side Story is basically Romeo and Juliet, and I would say it's probably closer to maybe like The Merchant of Venice than it is to Romeo and Juliet.
There's someone accused of a crime and accused of owing someone money, and they have to take a pound of flesh from them, and then it goes to court, and they find a they find a loophole to get out of it because he's a Jew.
I don't want to like, if I explain what I mean,
that's the
I'm gonna spoil it. No,
I don't care about spoilers, man. I really don't. Because I'm gonna, if I like it, I'm gonna like it no matter whether I know the ending or not. That's what I've found.
There's this whole question about like, you know, I think mostly what I'm thinking of is Portia in The Merchant of Venice and how she's got, you know, like different suitors.
Okay.
Well, actually, maybe, you know what? Scrap that. It's not like Merchant of Venice at all. Anyway,
it's like Merchant of Venice, except it's not.
Yeah, but it's also it's definitely not like Romeo and Juliet or West Side Story.
Okay.
Is it necessarily an original plot? Probably not. But I think it's different enough that In the Heights? No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, he wrote that when he was like, I think when he was still in college.
No, yeah, it's a book.
Is it?
Yeah. By Chiara Alegria Hudes.
Well, I didn't know that.
Came out in 2007.
Okay. Interesting. Anyways, you're flat out wrong.
To be fair, she wrote the book as a musical, and then it didn't make it into production until much later with Lin-Manuel Miranda. So, okay.
Okay. Anyway. Weird. I think he wrote it before that, though.
So she wrote the book for the musical, meaning not like a novel, like the storyline, the plot, and then he did the music and lyrics and kind of produced it.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. No, it's really good. And I mean, he definitely has a style of writing. And so like there's musical themes that are just part of the shows, but there's also like Lin-Manuel Miranda musical themes. I think like especially with the flow of like a lot of like the rap numbers. He has a very specific like way of writing that type of music. So yeah, it is going to all kind of, you know, sound the same. The same way that, you know, a lot of Billy Joel is going to sound like Billy Joel.
Yeah, and I think Billy Joel sounds a lot the same too, but I think that it's not just that Lin-Manuel Miranda sounds the same across his different musicals.
Can you say Lin-Manuel Miranda 5 times fast?
I cannot.
Sorry.
I think that within Hamilton, it is like 90% the same thing. It's all it's all that same rhythm. But I promise you, it is.
It's not, because I can listen.
I just sat down and watched it a week ago, and I was like,
I've had Dear Theodosia like stuck in my head all day.
Okay, well, to be fair, I could only make it through the first half, and then I was like, I need to take a break.
Is the best half.
So that's not hopeful, because I sat down, watched the first half, and said I need to take a break.
It's very long,
and that was a week or two ago.
The whole thing is very long, and I'm less interested in his philandering, than I am with like the historical stuff. Which,
sure,
I mean, he took some liberties in the telling of, you know, the history of it.
But, and that was another thing too. Like some of the stuff in it, it's not that he took some liberties. He straight up presents
false.
It's wrong, and he presents it as fact. Like there's one part where they say that Martha Washington named her cat after him because her cat was a player, and so is he. And he makes a point to pause everyone in the play, and they all go, "It's true," and it's not. I looked it up. It is not true. I will look it up for you right now.
Well, either way, it's a musical. It's not a documentary.
I get that. Okay.
Also, what somebody named their cat is very, very suspect.
According to the George Washington Museum at Mount Vernon, the story about Martha Washington naming her cat for Hamilton can be traced back to a satirical piece written by a British Captain Smythe in January of 1780, which was designed to embarrass the American revolutionaries.
Okay, well, yeah. What I do know is that Lin-Manuel Miranda got, I think, virtually all of the information that he did from the biography of Alexander Hamilton, which I have actually read I've listened to about half of it, but it's like it's at least 1,000. It's a very, very long book.
Yeah.
So that's on the author of that book. I don't think that's on Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Well, then it would also be on Lin-Manuel Miranda for not diversifying. Yeah, I get that it's a musical, and that's why I'm okay with him taking some liberties to summarize 30 years in 3 hours. I get that that's going to happen. But it's my problem wasn't with the fact that they said that, because, hey, it's a musical, they can say stuff. My problem was they paused it to say, it's true, you can look it up. And then I did, and it wasn't true.
Well, maybe that's what they intended.
And maybe. But
do your research, Google it.
Well, then he needs to, because if he got everything from one book, that's a problem, right?
Sorry, my alarm's going off.
Do I need to take your phone, man? This is class time.
I'm 31 years old. How dare you?
Before we go on to your last one, we'll stop the Hamilton argument. One time I was at church giving a talk, and I mentioned that I was a teacher, and right after I mentioned that, someone in the audience's phone went off. And I said, I can't remember exactly what I said. I think I said, like, turn it off or I'm going to have to take that. And it was hilarious. But everybody thought that I rigged it. Everybody thought that I did that on purpose. that I paid someone. Yeah. Anyway, what
could be?
So what's your last one?
My last one is that Skyrim is a mediocre game at best, and that Oblivion should be the hallmark of the series.
I haven't played either of those two games.
Well, okay, then we don't even need to discuss it.
I will say that what I have seen from Skyrim looks overrated, and I remember when everybody was talking about it.
Yeah.
And I remember when that game came out. Right, because we were in high school when that game came out, and I remember watching it.
It came out right when we graduated.
Is that it?
Because it took, like, it robbed an entire term from everyone in my hallway in the dorms. When I was living with John Barron.
Oh, hey.
Yeah. No, I mean, Skyrim is a great game, but it's Oblivion is a way better game. It's a way better piece of the Elder Scrolls media. And when it came out, I feel like the graphics were a little dated even for when it came out.
Yeah.
And I don't think it represents Bethesda's like best work. And I think you can kind of see that in the games that came after it that were also disappointing, like Fallout 4, Fallout 76, Starfield. But the games that came before it, like, with the Fallout series, New Vegas is a masterpiece. And I think that Oblivion is kind of the same thing for Elder Scrolls. It's just, I mean, it's got a lot richer, like, environment. I feel like the storyline is much better. I think the like art direction is also way better. Like, you feel like you're actually walking around a city as opposed to just a fort, which, like the biggest city in Skyrim is supposed to be, this massive, like it's kind of like, how Minas Tirith is supposed to be, huge, but then in Peter Jackson's like representation, you're like, I feel like 400 people live there.
Right.
Like more people went to my high school or our high school than live in Minas Tirith.
Right.
I feel like that's kind of the vibe.
I will say, I think Bethesda games in general are overrated. I know a lot of people talk them up. I know Starfield.
I think of the last decade, sure. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm looking at a list of the games that they've come out with, and none of them are ones that I was ever, like, into or even, like, attracted
Fallout and Starfield.
To.
What else?
Even then, I've never wanted to play the Fallout games. They just don't look like my thing.
I really like the Fallout games.
Well, and then I have a friend who loves Starfield, but I've watched gameplay of it, and I'm just like...
Oh, Starfield is utter trash. It took them 10 years to make a game, to make half of a game. It is... If they had fleshed it out, it would be phenomenal. But if they took 10 years to make that, somebody needs to lose their job. It was so disappointing.
Did you ever play Baldur's Gate 3 yet? Did you ever get into that one yet?
No, because I don't have a system that I can play it on.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is fantastic. I've played through it 2.5 times. And I've got several characters that I've created but haven't played through. But it is so much fun. And there are so many different minor things that the ending is usually going to be pretty much the same. Some of your character endings might be different. But what's really interesting is how the minor things you do in the game affect the actual other in-game connections and encounters that you can have with people. It's great. I bring it up because they also made this game for like 10 years. It was in beta for like 3 straight years.
Yeah,
and
I mean, when Baldur's Gate 2, I think, came out, what was it, like early 2000s?
Right, something like that. I don't know. This is the only one of them that I've played.
It was I've played it. I have it on my phone, but I've been familiar with it. And from what I get the sense of, it was an ambitious game when it was made. Then all of the time in between there, they spent making Baldur's Gate 3, and they actually, like, did the work. I don't know what they were doing with Starfield.
Well, that's the difference between Bethesda and Larian.
Yeah.
You know what game I want to play?
What's that?
The Stanley Parable.
I've like heard a lot of people really like that. I have no idea what it's about.
So it's first person, and you're just. Have you played the Portal games?
Yeah, I just started playing that on my Switch like a couple months ago.
It's kind of like that in the sense that as you're walking through, there's someone narrating what you're doing. In Portal, it's the mainframe computer talking to you and trying to tell you what to do. Whereas in the Stanley Parable, the narrator is just narrating what you're doing as you do it, but you don't have to do what the narrator does, and then the narrator has to justify what you did instead.
Okay.
So he'll be like, Stanley went through the red door, and then you go through the blue door, and it takes you into another copy of the same room, and it goes, went through the red door. You can keep doing that, and then it'll like bar off the blue door so you can't walk through it, and then you can turn around and go back through the door you came in, and he just goes, fine, you went through that door, and now you're here.
That's fun. I'll have to check that out. I've heard good things. I've heard it's very funny. Like that and Bard's Tale, I feel like come up a lot together. I've never heard of
that one.
Yeah, it's I think I may have tried that one, but it's like a narrative story. I don't know if it's like point and click, the way that like Myst was.
Okay.
But yeah, I've heard a lot of people describe it as like the funniest video game. The funniest, not funnest, but like funniest video game that they've ever played.
Well, I will save you from the heat. We should probably...
Yes, it's quite warm.
Why don't you do our sign-off, and I will do our fun fact.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you all for listening. Please like, subscribe, tell your friends. Also, go check out Halcyon Club. They are, I think, coming out with a new album pretty soon. But I've already heard some of their songs. They're great. And you can already check out their song, This Life is Tough But Fair, which we use as our intro and outro music.
Yeah, it's great. I've checked out some more of their stuff recently, and you should too.
Yeah. Their new stuff is really good. There's 2 songs in particular that I'm really excited about.
What are they?
I don't know the names. I also am not sure if they have names because my friend is just sending them to the group chat to be like, "Hey, check this out." But they actually like they've got a couple like fully fleshed out songs with like the the mixing and everything, and it's really good. So, yeah, thank you to Halcyon Club.
All right, here is my fun fact. And I'm choosing this one because we just did some hot takes that are sometimes a little controversial opinions or a little outrageous. Yep. And this is outrageous.
Like Lin-Manuel Miranda's overrated. Are you kidding me?
He is. The average horse has more than 1 horsepower.
Yeah. Okay. Do you know why?
I do, but because why don't you explain it?
It's the amount of work that a horse can do on a pulley as it's lifting up a mine, like a lift from a mine shaft.
Right. So, and it has to do with a certain amount of weight. And we have since changed our definitions of how much weight that needs to be and how much like energy is required of that, to the point where it used to be, yes, this is how much 1 horse can be, but because we know that all horses are different and 1 horse might be able to lift more or less, we had to adopt a single number, and that number was lower than what the average horse can actually pull. So horses are more than 1 horsepower.
Yeah, and they always were, because pulleys make things easier.
All right, well, thank you for listening.
That brings me into a whole thing about James Watts and how he didn't invent the steam engine that I'm not going to get into. That's for